Welcome to Endurance Minded. How are you?
Doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me, Taylor.
Yeah, I'm really excited. This is a you work a lot in a space that is um I think wildly underserved, misunderstood, and that is rest and recovery, among other things. And so I'm really genuinely looking forward to unpacking that one for myself. It's something that I think many of us struggle with, but it's been a real journey for me personally to figure out what that looks and feels like for myself as someone who would describe themselves as a high driver and a high achiever, and so how do you balance that with a real need for rest, and then on the athletic side, the recovery piece, and I know that so many people that listen to this show are in the same boat, the trying to do it all, and how do you find that space. So I'm very, very excited to learn more and to unpack what that's supposed to be for us. And but the place that I like to start, and I think a fitting place with any conversation, is to kind of start from the beginning or get a bit of an origin story. So I'd love to just have you walk us through your story. What led you to where you're at today? What led you to focus on rest and recovery? Most specifically, what led you to your most recent book, Move, Rest, Recover? Yeah, just give us an update. Bring us up to speed on how you got here, and a little bit of your story.
Sure, that feels like a good place to start. Um, so I first took up yoga as an injured collegiate athlete when prescribed doing some yoga, stretching, flexibility work, core work by our team doctor. And like like most sort of teenagers would be, I think I was quite reluctant to shift gears out of that, high performing, driven athlete mentality, which, operates under the assumption that progress only happens when you are working hard. And so I spent a lot of time over a couple of months when I was injured, working on my flexibility, trying some yoga classes, really working on my core strength in different ways. And I found months later, when I got back on the court, that I was just a different athlete because I had created a much better balance in my body, um, in the context of balancing not only strength and flexibility, but an understanding of how rest and recovery can serve us truly in our sports and really in all aspects of life. For me, that really translated um, into being a student as well, and balancing the demands of being a collegiate athlete. And I can remember getting back on the court, and it just was like a revelation that really is energizing. And so that's when the dots first started to connect for me personally, and sparked my initial interest in rest and recovery as a practice. Fast forward a couple of years when I turned to teaching yoga. I started my teaching career about 20 years ago, working with athletes, and I was coaching most of the sports teams at the University of Washington at the time. And as a new teacher, I would turn up with all kinds of ideas about what I thought would serve different athletes in different sports based on you know the very unique and diverse demands of different sports. And 10 times out of 10, I would have to scrap my plan and just have everyone lie down and breathe and and relax. And so that's what we did. I found that really rest and recovery was the most needed thing at that time working with athletes. And over the years, I would say that has been the most common universal theme I see everywhere I look is the imbalance between working and resting. And so that's really been my muse, and has inspired my work over the years, whether it has been a group of athletes or a room full of mothers or corporate executives. It's again and again very kind of similar thing that I see. Not only the fact that people are tired, they really struggle to make the shift from work to rest, from effort to ease. And so that's led to, me developing this body of work. Move, Rest, Recover is actually my second book about restorative practice specifically. My last book, Work In, is a book of recovery practice specifically for athletes. Whereas Move, Rest, Recovery is rest for real for all of us.
Yeah, I love that. I love the integrated piece. And I want to go back to one thing that you touched on, was that you were able to see how that recovery and practice and focus on rest actually informed and really supported your work as a student. And you were, you could see kind of how, doing the one thing wasn't just about your recovery from sport, but also that showed up in your kind of quote unquote real life in a very real way. And so that's for me been one of the most impactful takeaways for athletics in general. Just the I find that engaging in the practices required to stay active and healthy translate into every other area of my life. And fitness is a great byproduct almost of that. And
Yes.
I'd love for you just to expand on your experience with that, be it in that time period or fast forward into your adult life. What's been your experience with how those things cross over and support what you're trying to do in these other areas of your life?
Right. And I mean, of course, it's really like, we do these practices on a yoga mat, or maybe your practice is running or lifting weights or whatever your practice is. It's really the most important thing, I think, is how that affects you and supports you outside of that practice. Off the mat is where it really matters most. So, I can say for myself, developing my own yoga and rest and recovery practice. Overall, I feel a lot more ease throughout my day. Every day, I feel a lot more able to handle the inevitable uncertainties and challenges that, stack up as you move through the day. And, back when I was a student, I remember noticing right away, oh, I feel like I am focusing better in class. I can study better. My attentional kind of capacity felt like it was increasing noticeably. And I was sleeping better, which is a big one. And these are things that I've just, I've just noticed continue to kind of expand, and things that I've built on over the years. And, with the rest practice, it kind of becomes something that is less of this formal, like, to do or thing that you have to like tick off. It's not like, oh, I've got to do my workout, I've got to do my rest practice. It's rather you find things that work for you that you can weave into your day, throughout your day, as a like natural, normal part of your rhythm. And that's when I think it really becomes, um, you know, something that you are taking into your life, into the flow of your life. And that's where it really matters. And that's where it really supports you and you feel the difference, uh, no matter what you're doing and no matter what comes up.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. It it leads me to think about the the myth that we don't have time to rest. And so you talk about this kind of this integrated practice and weaving in it. It doesn't have to be this dedicated, almost kind of like tactical thing that we do, but it is a more practical application of that. Let's help me understand that. I mean, let's talk about the myth that we don't have time for it. You know, what we have time for or all these other things, but that's often the first on the chopping block. So, what's help me unpack that? How do we shift our focus there?
Yeah, sure. I
And
mean,
maybe why is that the case? Maybe let me. I am interested. I'll ask it specifically because I was like, why does that even exist to begin with? You know, why is rest the first on the chopping block when we know I think if you asked anyone, you know, whether or not they want to admit it or not, we certainly know that it is important and critical. And we, you know, more focused on sleep now. And I mean, you know, the information is there. So let's start there. I mean, why is it the first to go? And then, you know, how do we right the ship and really change the narrative there with that the myth that exists.
yeah, sure. I mean, let's be honest, we live in a world that asks us to do too much all the time and leaves little to no time or space to make sense of it, to really integrate or absorb what has happened. And it's kind of like this inertia and collective mindset that we must always be going, making, doing, producing. And it's really easy to get sort of caught in that mindset. And we're sort of geared up kind of in that way that it becomes very difficult to switch gears. It's like that's the zone we inhabit. And to the point where moving in the other direction toward rest and recovery is unfamiliar and uncomfortable. And so while we might acknowledge that we're tired, or we might even pay lip service to rest by, I don't know, writing rest day in your calendar, or, you know, assuming that you're recovering, going for beer on a Friday night, or with, you know, which that's nice too. That can be relaxing too. However, rest is not a default. It doesn't happen as a default when we're not working. And in all of our busyness, we've lost kind of the skill, the ability to effectively transition from work to rest. And in doing so, it's like not possible for us to really fully recover effectively or efficiently. And that's why we have problems like, you know, trouble sleeping, um, feeling, you know, not just this sort of deep fatigue that kind of has a cumulative effect. Um, Eventually, I mean, burnout is has become really prevalent, and this is really the reason for it. We wait until we're ill, injured, or fully burned out to consider rest like as an option and an important one. So I think it's just this mindset that it's not something that we can turn to throughout the day, every day, not just at the end of the day when all the work is done. Um, this is a really like problematic way of thinking, because if you wait to rest until everything is done, everything's ticked off your to-do list, all the planets are like aligned, it won't happen ever, right? And
Mm.
so, we lean back on this. So I'm too busy. I don't have time. But the reality is, rest doesn't have to be formal or fancy. You don't need a big container of time. You don't need any like fancy kit, or even gadgets or anything. Really, your attention holds the greatest power to restore you in the moments when you really need rest the most.
Mm. How do we what's the role you mentioned we don't need fancy stuff, and I think for more and more for so many, we're looking to I could just I can literally, I'm like flashing through conversations that I've had with people. I'm like, okay, like we gotta, really gotta focus on recovery. Like clearly things aren't going well. Your body is clearly not responding. Um, and then there's a few questions that follow. Okay, like what do I need to buy? What where do I need a subscription to a
What
thing?
do
Do
I
I need
do?
a
Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned like the gadgets, and so now there's okay, well, then maybe another question would be to weigh that observation or that very real feeling that they have against some quantitative metric, and so my watch or my this or my that says a certain thing about me, and so what I guess I'm interested in, what is your how do we leverage all of these different things that we have access to make an informed decision that is right and appropriate, and I guess are they valuable? My watch tells me to sleep or that I'm good or I'm not, like, and I've found myself doing that. Like I feel tired, but I look at a device and I'm like, well, should I be tired? It says that I got enough sleep. I mean, as an example. And so I think there is this real kind of like push and pull juxtaposition thing going on with all this quantitative information versus a more intuitive, potentially way to think about when we recover and whether or not it is important or not on a particular day. So yeah, like what are your I guess what's your kind of general take on how to navigate that in this very real kind of heavily digitally influenced world, as well as access to all kinds of resources and bits and pieces and thingamabobs that are supposed to help us do these things. I'll use quotes better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's no easy answer to that. And recovery is an incredibly unique and personal practice. There is no universal prescription to suit every person at all times. And the gadgets are handy. They're helpful. They give us a lot of useful information. I think oftentimes, like, part of the problem is if you have a device telling you need to rest, it's not telling you what to do or how to rest. And like
Hmm.
I said before, because of the way we operate in this always on mode, uh, we don't know intuitively how to rest or what to do. Um, which is a big problem because it doesn't happen on default. Just if your watch tells you you need to rest, how do we make that happen? These are skills that we have to really rest and recovery has kind of got to the point where these are skills. It's a skill set that you have to activate and train in the same way you would train a muscle. You lift weights, you get stronger. You rest more. You practice making the transition, settling your nervous system. The more efficient you become, at doing that, and it's just ironic that there's so much kind of difficulty around how, when, and why, and when and how to rest, when in reality it is the most readily available tool available to us, readily
Hmm.
available and yet underutilized tool available for our well-being and ultimately for our best performance.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, you're
Mm-hmm.
so right. It's we have so much information and access to it and about it, and yet it's the thing that we butt up against, or or disregard most frequently. um, and yet, it's um, we find it easier always to find time to work, and then we say that we're too busy to rest, right? I find that's like the kind of narrative, like juxtaposition piece. I'm like, well, we have
Absolutely.
we have time to do all these other things, so what
Yeah.
is, and I know we touched on it a little bit earlier, but I am like, why is that the priority? I mean, is it just purely cultural, like we're just wired for that? And you said, like, it feels uncomfortable to rest, and so we just shy away from it. Is I mean, is because like on the outside looking in, you're like, it should be so much easier. Like we shouldn't have this just such fraught relationship with rest and recovery, but we do. So I mean, yeah, is that really the answer? Is it's just we're kind of wired to, in the modern age, and it's just now very hard for us to do that.
I think it is 100% the collective mentality. And I mean, think about, at the end of the week, if you're tired, um, so often at the end of the week when we're tired, and then we pack our weekends full of all kinds of things. It's like, I can think of many times recently, asking someone, different people, how was your weekend? Oh, it was exhausting, and kind of just listening to all the different things they fit in, most of which are highly discretionary activities, everything they're
Sure.
packing into the weekend. Um, no wonder they're tired. And, um, you know, and it's really interesting. Often I'll respond because, as a practice, I choose to keep my weekends, our family's weekends, very spacious for this very reason. I'll respond when someone asks me the same question. Um, we rested, and I am met with so much confusion when I give that response. It's
Yeah.
really it really says, it says a lot. I think it's almost like we wear our busyness like a badge of honor. And you have to
Hmm.
ask yourself, like, you know, does that feel good? Are you like, is that something like, is it something that you feel proud of? Is it something that like actually genuinely is making you feel good? And I think that's something that like we should ask ourselves about the volume of stuff we're managing, or the next time an unexpected little window of time presents itself in your day, would you be more likely to just try to fit in, oh yes, I can just fit in that extra errand or fit in this extra task? What if you took a 10-minute break, like a real one? And like, what does that actually mean to take a break? And I don't mean like, what do we usually do? We pick up our phone, right? And,
Hmm.
um, you know, it's no surprise that it's uncomfortable. Like the word boredom, I hear often. Oh, I feel it's boring. I feel bored if I stop. And I don't think
Mm.
boredom is the right word. I think it's just this, you know, uh, it's not familiar and it's not comfortable. And so it's almost like for that reason, to rest takes actually a lot of courage. And we're so
Mm,
good and we're so brave. The amount of stuff we do is just incredible and mind boggling, really. And what if you applied that same tenacity to moving in the other direction? I think most of us don't even consider that as a possibility, and how actually productive that is.
mhm,
Giving yourself the chance to actually like really calm and settle yourself, integrate what has happened, integrate all of your hard work, and fully recharge for the next session, then feel the difference. And I think, when we give ourselves the opportunity to do that, uh, it's highly motivating when you do feel the
mhm.
difference.
Yeah. It's it makes me think about the one of the things that I've tried to work on personally is just a shift in language, and you mentioned, when you ask people how their weekend was, like, oh, it's exhausted, or it's exhausting, or I'm sure that you get this. It seems to be universal and ubiquitous. You ask somebody, how are you? And they say that I'm busy, right? It's
Yeah,
the first,
busy,
like
busy.
I wasn't asked, that's not the question we're asking, right? Like,
Yeah.
how are you? And the response is inevitably 99.9% of the time, it's I'm busy. Um, and so I'm curious, is there an opportunity, or what role does the language that we use to describe how we're moving through the world um, dictate and impact kind of our ability and access to rest? Because it seems like we use a lot of language that kind of heightens the experience, right? I'm busy. We say all these things, right? I'm busy. I'm tired. I'm stressed. Well, then it strikes me that if we continue to use language that supports that, that's how we're going to feel, right? It's going to make the opposite of that, or opportunities for rest, feel further and further away, if that's just our narrative. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on the role, like what is the role of language, and are there shifts from your perspective that might make some of these things that feel really far away or really hard, maybe a little bit more accessible?
Right. I mean, that absolutely perpetuates the busyness, and it's almost like we feel guilty, or we feel like it's bad if we're not busy or we're not stressed, like that something's wrong. Or somehow you haven't done enough. It's not enough. You're not enough if you're not busy and stressed. And again, it's like, I think you have to ask yourself, when you're saying, oh, I'm so busy, are you mad about that, or are you proud of it? I think
Mm,
that's something we really have to ask ourselves. And um, it's I think really up to each of us to like take a look at that, and deviating from that again takes courage when everyone else is sprinting so hard all the time. It feels uncomfortable to even say that you're going to take some time off, or to, take your time to respond to some of the the notifications, or
mm-hmm,
it feels uncomfortable to just kind of leave things be a little bit. And I think that as a practice, we need to get a little bit more honest about how that's really affecting us. Like, how does that make you feel? Is that actually supporting you to move toward your goals? Because the reality is you cannot perform your best at anything if you are ill, injured, or burned out. You just can't.
mm-hmm.
It's just not sustainable. I mean, that's like, it's a scientific fact. Our bodies are engineered for balance, and that is as true for work and rest as it is for strength and flexibility.
Mm, yeah. I I I it makes me think about, I think you said like it takes real courage to rest, and I know even from my own experience, and I've talked to others about this, is just to like honestly respond. Um, if someone says like, "Are you available?" or "Can you do this?" and just to say like no, and then if they might ask why, you just would say because no, because I don't need to fill every time with a thing, and that's
Yeah.
something that for me has been really a game changer, is just to be very, very steadfast in having dedicated space for things that are not work in my day, right? One of the things that's important to me is like I want to get my dog outside, and I don't take devices, and it's a time, and I'm lucky enough to live in a place that is beautiful, um and I do that. I mean, I do that during daylight hours, so that's when people are working, and my phone's going off, and all the things are happening, and it's very like empowering to just be like to really just value that time as much as anything else. But I'm not patting myself on the back because I mess this up all the time, or I'm not, I fall victim to the stuff that we're talking about. But I'll say that to people, and they're like, "That's impossible. I can never do that." I'm like, okay. I mean, maybe if that's the narrative, but I don't know. It makes me think that yeah, that just really resonates. That it does take a similar level of effort, maybe even more effort and courage, to rest. It also makes me. You write that rest is a power stance, and I really love that phrase, because it's not something that we, I think, would equate with power, right? I think it actually makes us feel weak a lot of times, right? If I rest, I'm weak, or other people are getting ahead, or I need to do more, and that's the only, So what is define that for me from your perspective, and then give me, yeah, I'd love if you could just expand on that, and kind of maybe help us take this point that we're talking about to um yeah, just put some language to it. And I love that, again, like, yeah, but rest as a power
Sure.
stance. I read that and I was like,
Yeah.
yes, that's killer.
Yeah.
So good.
That, I
Not the
mean,
way that I would have described it. I mean, even though like intellectually I was like, totally, I get it. No, that would have been a real
it's
struggle for me to say
counterintuitive.
that.
Yeah, it's
Totally. Yeah, no, that's
counterintuitive.
great.
Yeah, well, like back to what you were just saying about how, it can be difficult to actually just say no, thank you to certain things just because you don't have to fill your whole day or simply because you are tired. But I think, um, creating that space for yourself, sort of those boundaries, and like communicating them honestly and openly, that gives other people permission to do the same as well, rather than, being stuck in this narrative and mentality that we must always be doing. And, taking an action like that, power stance, that is, owning your time and space and energy. And that is a very strong, powerful thing to do, in a world that is asking us to do the opposite all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, and there are so many gestures that you can make to yourself to kind of like embody that, whether it is saying no thank you to invites because you're tired or you just need some space. It could be having an early night. It could be scheduling yourself a 10-minute break to transition between each of your activities. There are so many simple things that we can do throughout the day to really sustain our energy and rest to fuel ourselves as we go, rather than again, waiting until we feel like we've accomplished enough to allow
Mm,
ourselves to have a breather, to catch our breath, because
hmm.
too often we just take it too far. And then it's even more difficult to swing things back into balance. There is a more balanced approach that we can take as we move through the day.
Hmm. Like we don't, yeah, there's definitely this idea, I think, this kind of pervasive undertone of we don't deserve rest until we earn it. And then that really,
Absolutely.
we kind of never get off that hamster wheel, right? Like I've found that if I'm in that mindset, I never really get there, right? I'm like, oh, well, I'll do one more thing or and then of course it's a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of where you just get stuck in the hamster wheel. Um, you mentioned a couple of things that people can do to access, like creating space in between your calendar and like having some blocks. But I'd love to have you just expand on that. And we talked about that a little bit earlier. You said, like, we have a lot of access to when I need to rest, but the how I need to rest or how to actually make that happen is where a lot of people get stuck. I would say, the overwhelming majority, they might certainly feel tired, or their watch tells them, or they're pulling in data from all these things. But then what? What are they supposed to do? It feels really insurmountable. I think that we certainly have the idea that rest is a much bigger task than I know that you advocate for or outline. So, what does that look like? What are some more examples of ways that people can really, I think tactically integrate this in a way that they feel like they have some control, and some, maybe autonomy is the better word, right? I feel like the rest piece feels a bit kind of out of our reach, and like we can only really have autonomy over our to-do list, but rest is not really an autonomous environment, right? For many people, they
Right.
feel like it's not accessible to them. So how do people access it? What are some kind of other examples and ways that practice actually becomes practical, and helps people shift into, a better access point for this on a more consistent basis?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's all about practicality because if your practice doesn't fit in your real life, it won't work. So that's why really practicality is really the connective tissue of so much of my work and of my new book. And the approach really that I encourage people to take is a little often. Like so often, I think that we feel like we don't have time to rest, and we feel like we need like this bigger chunk of time, or we have to go to an hour long like restorative yoga class or something like that. When in reality, it's a few minutes here and there throughout the day that actually holds a lot more power to recharge you and sustain you and help you to perform your best. So, a couple of examples, practices that I share in the book. One of them I call the 2 minute reset. So, the next time you are going to make yourself some coffee, for example, while you're waiting for the kettle to boil or, the coffee to brew, rather than standing there and scrolling your phone or busying yourself with, other admin, what if you just stop and breathe deeply for those 2 minutes? Soften your gaze, look out the window. It doesn't have to be formal or fancy. That is a harnessing of your scattered attention that is a deeply restorative gesture in itself. And, I think another really often overlooked opportunity to rest are points of transition. We're so often rushing from one task or one activity to the next. Something is ending and something is beginning. But what about the space in between? It's just lost because we're so rushed. And as a result, we are just accumulating, all of these moments of stress and tension throughout the day rather than giving ourselves these little breathers, almost like little release valves as we go. Um, so, for example, one thing that I do as a practice every day, 10 minutes before I know I have to leave to pick up my kids, I shut everything down and I put my legs up the wall or set myself up in some sort of restorative posture, child's pose, or just sit and breathe. Legs up the wall is the most, I call it the boss. It's the boss of recovery. It's the most like powerful, simple restorative pose. Just what it sounds like. Lie down, put your legs up the wall. It's that simple. And you don't have to stay long. 2 to 10 plus minutes, whatever you've got, just taking that time to put your body in a shape that is the opposite of how we spend our time. Putting your legs upside down allows just all the excess blood, fluid to, recirculate. It is incredibly calming for your nervous system. But in taking that time to transition, to actually stop what you're doing, pause and rest, like really rest. Don't look at your phone. Don't busy yourself in the endless conveyor belt of admin, and just actually, shut it all down and then move on to your next thing and notice the difference in the way you feel and the way you're able to handle whatever it is that's coming at you next. And, that's, again, try it, gain some reps with that as a simple 5 minute a day practice. And, I think that the results are pretty motivating to continue. And the point is that we do a little of these things often enough, they don't feel like things that we have to do or fit in. It just becomes a natural thing that we do. Every between calls, I just push back from my desk and I soften my gaze and I look up at a tree and I just breathe for 30 seconds, these like micro resets. And it becomes kind of like brushing your teeth. You just do it. Like you wouldn't, you wouldn't not brush your teeth because you just feel a bit dirty, right? If you just feel like kind of icky, I don't like feel okay. It's like, it becomes sort of like that, something that becomes more of a default, and then you feel more ease because of those small, accessible practices.
I love that. That's so good. Yeah, I think even just the space, so many people, it's Zoom meetings and phone calls, that's the modern workplace more or less. And I think just as a reminder that to like small buffers, I think that's like like I hear that so clearly, to just be a little bit more intentional about those like small spaces literally between phone calls. And I know for me, that's been the most impactful, is just literally just take like setting my calendar up so that you cannot book back to back, right? It's 15 minutes or something like that. Just a second to, take a beat, do a lap, get some water, get some, not look. And I don't have to spend that whole 15 minutes, but just some time. It's amazing if I have days where, it got tight or I had to be accommodating for people or something like that, and it is back to back versus those days where there's just a small space. It's amazing the difference that I feel at the end of the day. It is a totally different day when I have just literally cumulatively maybe 15 minutes throughout the day versus none at all. So I totally hear that. So good. I'm glad. I think people's access to like, what do I do? I think feels so insurmountable. So I'm so appreciative that you gave us some insight into that. Any parting words? What's the one thing that you want to leave people with in terms of anything related to rest, recovery, your yeah, what if people take nothing else away, or there's something that we didn't cover, what's the one thing that you hope people walk away with?
It's really just to remember that rest is the most readily available tool available to your well-being, and that um, it is just really the most available thing you have, and that all you need to access it truly is your attention. Slow down, breathe deeply, pay attention. Just let it be that simple, and don't underestimate the power in those very small pauses to restore you. And, in the same way that you train and work out and you get stronger, you feel so much more fit, and, you strengthen your ability to rest well and support yourself and sustain yourself, in the same way. So rest and feel the difference. Yeah.
I love that. Well, Erin Taylor, your newest book is Move, Rest, Recover, Your Practical Guide to Balancing Mind and Body. I can't recommend it enough. It's incredible. I had a chance to check it out before we talked. It now sits on my desk. It is a good reminder,
Oh,
and truly
great.
a practical guide to make sure that I'm not just jumping from to-do list item to to-do list item, which is an easy trap to fall into. So thanks so much, Erin. I'm grateful for the conversation, and I can't wait for this conversation to help change people's perspectives. Thank you.